Welcome to today's Builder Series. And I've got to admit, today is going to be a very exciting one. In fact, it's one that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I've got Terry Lamb, co-founder of Pike. And what they're describing with Pike is being considered the next generation of borrow-lend protocols. And it's leveraging CCTP and Wormhole's cross-chain relayer. So let's go back a little bit. CCTP solves the issue of liquidity fragmentation and poor user experiences caused by unofficial bridge versions of USDC floating literally around the ecosystem. So apps built on CCTP can essentially teleport native USDC from one chain to another, creating a highly secure and capital efficient way to transact in a multi-chain world. So once again, we've got my good friend, Terry Lamb, co-founder of Pike. And I want to start off with a direct question. Why is Pike being considered the next generation of lender borrow protocols? Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. To dive right in, why we think Pike is the next gen borrow lend protocol. There's actually a few reasons, but before I actually dive into the reason, we would need to kind of look at the existing borrow lend protocols to understand what are some of the things that they've done a really good job in, as well as what are some of the areas that we feel that can be improved. So with that being said, right, I'm sure most of the listeners here are aware of some of these blue chip DeFi borrow lend protocols like, Aave, Compound, they're category leaders. They've been extremely robust. And I feel like they've done a tremendous job in kind of, trailblazing the path for decentralized borrow lend, making that experience permissionless, being able to put utility to assets. So they've done a phenomenal job. However, with that being said, the space back in, 2017, looks very different than today. At least back then, most of this DeFi or specifically lending and borrowing activities were mostly done on the Ethereum chain. But today, obviously, we have new networks proliferating left and right by the day, and some are actually have achieved tremendous traction, which leads to, this frothy, multi-chain world.
Right.
Now, with that being said, for us, for Pike, when we came in and we kind of saw that, okay, you have these new different networks, new assets, new native assets to the network, we can't apply the same, model, the same borrow lend model, because there's a few things that you mentioned just now. Capital efficiency is a very important point. So therefore, that gave us the inspiration, okay, to see how we could redesign, borrow lend, specifically cross-chain borrow lend, to really provide for a native, truly multi-chain experience. Okay, now going back to the question, why we think we're the next gen. There's actually three buckets, you could call it problems that we're trying to solve. The first one being, the existing, borrow lend architecture, right? They're not truly multi-chain. Okay, and what I mean by truly multi-chain is that, if you take a look at Aave, and we all love Aave here. I confidently say that
For sure.
Yeah. But when we take a look at, let's say Aave, they actually have, multiple implementations on different networks, right? There's Aave on Ethereum, Aave on Arbitrum, Aave on Optimism, Aave on Polygon, Avalanche, etc. Right? So there's like different implementations, and each of these implementations are individual markets. Okay, so what that means is, these markets are actually siloed. Okay. Now, when it comes to DeFi, siloed markets is actually not really a good thing, because these liquidity are all kind of walled in each of these individual market, meaning that capital efficiency is very low. Okay. So for a user to deal with, let's say, Aave on Arbitrum, they're kind of just, restrained to that specific market. And, a very like real use case, right, is if, let's say, a user, has a lot of collateral, okay, has a lot of assets on the Arbitrum network, they want to put that into, let's say, Aave on Arbitrum, but there's not enough stablecoin, okay, on Aave on Arbitrum. Okay, there's not enough, let's say, USDC liquidity on there. So this user cannot, carry out the function that they wish to carry out. Whereas they have to bridge that asset back to Ethereum because, Ethereum has the most liquid stablecoin market, USDC. And, this is, one of the biggest, crux of, siloed markets.
Yeah. And it's a big one too. It's a huge one.
It's the biggest one, we would say.
Yeah.
The second, major problem that we're hoping to solve is the security. Okay, now because some of these existing broadband protocols, because of their multiple instances, multiple implementations on different networks, what happens is they actually rely on cross-chain bridges. Okay, where the asset needs to go through this cross-chain bridge to the source to the destination network, and what happens a lot of times is one of the way of doing this like cross-chain is wrapping those assets, right? So what happens is this creates two problems. Okay, one is going through the cross-chain, waiting for your transaction to come through. It's not entirely very user friendly. Okay,
right.
It's kind of like if it's kind of like in e-commerce, right? It's like, oh, if let's say payment was all integrated, you pick you selected everything that you want to buy, added to the shopping cart. But wait a minute, because payment was not integrated, you gotta like switch out to another website to do payment and then come back. It's kind of like that.
I couldn't even imagine doing that. Oh my goodness, you're right. Oh.
Exactly. So, however, this is not the major reason to security. The major reason is, when assets, gets wrapped, it creates sort of this new version of the asset. So let's take, for example, USDC, for example, because you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, unofficial wrap version, or I forgot like the term that you actually used, but I liked it a lot. What happens is like there's these like iterations, okay, of tokens or assets. But what happens is they are actually not the official version. And so what that means is this wrapped asset then relies on a new Oracle price feed. And that actually opens up, an attack vector. Okay, because price oracles can be manipulated. And, that's also one of the reasons why this model, right, like using cross-chain bridges, by the way, I forgot to mention, it's kind of already it's known to be an attack vector, right? It's like a honeypot, and then with using Oracle price feed, this adds another security attack vector. So this is the second reason why we feel like this can be tremendously improved on. And for us, Pike, we actually do not deal with any of the wrapped assets. We do not rely on cross-chain bridges because we only deal with native assets. Okay. And Pike is built upon, key cross-chain infrastructure pieces like, CCTP, like Wormhole's cross-chain relayer. So therefore, we do not rely on cross-chain bridges, which tremendously reduces, the area or the surface area of attack vector. So simply put, the reason why it's more secure from a security standpoint is because it's more secure, because we rely on, less so on the existing technology or
makes a lot of sense.
Mechanism. The third reason why we feel Pike is defined or categorized as next gen is from a user experience point of view. user experience is definitely very important. Carrying on from what I just mentioned, around doing a transaction, but then in the middle, you kind of have to go through this bridging process and then going back to transaction because we're not relying on cross-chain bridges. So, that part is completely forgone. Mm-hmm. So from a user experience, they can interact with Pike from their, home chain meaning the chains where, they have, most of their assets, or the chains where, they do most of their activities, because Pike is built upon a hub and spoke model. So what that means is if let's say, you are a, Arbitrum maximalist and most of your assets sits on the Arbitrum network.
Right.
So what you can do is you can directly deposit, let's say, the ARB token to Pike, and basically that would register, a credit for you to be able to borrow based on that credit or based on that collateral that sits on the Arbitrum network. And you can borrow, let's say, on the Optimism network or the Base network or the Ethereum network, because you're only dealing with the native assets. So what happens is, from a user's point of view, right, you no longer, because let's say you saw an opportunity on Ethereum, but most of your assets is in Arbitrum, you no longer need to first bridge your Arbitrum assets over to Ethereum, then put it into the Ethereum market to capture the opportunity. This is completely forgone. So it means like pretty much like staying native, okay, to where to your so-called like home chain of where your most of your assets sits. So this is one big user experience enhancement that Pike is able to provide. The second reason is mostly around some of the newer borrow lend protocols. We've kind of made an observation and saw that, some of these protocols actually rely very heavily on tokenomics.
Right.
What that means is, it really fosters or creates a player versus player environment where, are they really creating a true borrow and lend demand or use case? It's questionable. Right. But from our point of view, right, like the way that we've designed Pike is we want to be able to, really foster the true borrow and lend demand, provide, the most seamless experience for doing cross-chain borrow lend. So, just to summarize very quickly, the three, I guess, key reasons, right? One is, siloed markets, right? Second reason is improvement on security. We minimize the surface area for attack vectors. And then finally, a tremendous improvement of user experience because we're able to build on top of cross-chain infrastructure pieces like CCTP, as well as, wormholes, cross-chain message relay.
Nice. Now, Terry, I know you said it's hard for me, honestly, to figure out which ones are the best reasons, because all of these seem to check off so many important boxes. I want to take a quick step back because you all have been in the scene for a long time. This is not your first rodeo, so to speak. So, curious to I guess learn a little bit of background there. Number one, but number two, why CCTP? Like, how did you get settled and realizing that this was the best tool for Pike to use?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe I could start by sharing a little bit on, how this idea kind of, came along, right? And how we kind of discovered CCTP as well as, wormholes, cross-chain message relay solution. So for us, as a team, we've actually been building DeFi products since early 2018. So we've been experimenting, trying, different things. Decentralized financial applications are things that we as a team are passionate about. So what happened was we got very close to the guys over at Wormhole currently. Robinson, Dan. While we were building a protocol, a DeFi protocol in the Polkadot ecosystem, we got to work very closely with those guys. And at the end of last year, as Wormhole was kind of getting ready to debut their new solution stack for cross-chain messaging, Robinson just gave me a call and said, hey, we needed a team. We needed kind of like a flagship team for a cross-chain borrow lend application. Would you guys be interested? So that kind of started the opportunity. And for us, what we did was we actually went into exploring and looking into the solution stack of Wormhole's cross-chain message relayer. And it actually gave us the inspiration, right, of what I just mentioned about where some of these improvements can be made to the existing lending and borrowing market, given the new market conditions of multi-chain. So that was kind of like the starting point. And we started building Pike at the beginning of this year, January of this year. We knew that Wormhole's technology was going to be one key and integral part to Pike. But as we were exploring, for us, we knew that because it's a borrow lend application, it's a borrow lend protocol, we need to have stablecoin, right? Because that's actually one of the pillar use case, right? Users wants to collateralize to get stablecoin, and in our opinion, USDC is the gold standard. At least as of today, USDC still dominates, the DeFi application in terms of stablecoin.
Definitely. You got to say that again, because that's something that we see all the time. So I'm glad somebody else is seeing that as well.
Yeah, obviously. So in hindsight, right? Because we've been building in the space for a while, we've kind of seen like different iterations or different versions of stablecoins. But I think, hands down, USDC is the mainstream, stablecoin, the gold standard for DeFi builders, for DeFi applications. They're deeply integrated. They have the most volume across DeFi applications. Whereas, other types of stablecoins, they may have other specialized use cases. But as DeFi builders, as we're trying to, build out Pike, we knew that, USDC liquidity is also another detrimental piece to building out this protocol. So that's when we started, going into finding ways, right? And really following closely the footsteps of, Circle's deployment footprint. Because obviously, there's because obviously USDC is native at the time, USDC was native to a few chain. You guys just announced, CCTP, but in terms of the actual integration, it wasn't really available at the time when we were kind of exploring. So, really spending the time to figure out, okay, first, we only are going to deal with native USDC. So none of those unofficial bridge or wrap versions. And second, is we need to also figure out, okay, the CCTP module now, like which chains are you going to be supporting? And we're actually following very closely because, as I mentioned, for Pike, we're operating on a hub and spoke model, right? So the first batch of chains that Pike will be made available on are Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, as well as Base. So basically, all of these chains are where CCTP is also supported. But one final point that I kind of want to highlight here was during this exploration process, right, of figuring out whether CCTP was the right solution and where we kind of got the conviction and the confidence was when we had our call with the Circle CCTP product team. And at the time, I think this was in March or early April. We had our hypothesis on the positioning of CCTP. but we weren't entirely sure. But this call that we had, really gave us the confidence because, the hypothesis that we had was, it seems like CCTP is a solution designed for developers to help scale the adoption of USDC, at least from the documentations, the way that you guys are trying to market CCTP. That's how it looked like. We weren't sure, right? So
right.
we that was the first question of that we asked, right? We were like, we're not sure, are you guys like operating on this kind of model? Like, are you guys, is this a developer facing tool, right? Like, are you guys trying to run a B2B to C model with CCTP? And the response was yes. And then we actually shared with them, with you guys, how we felt, integration was going to look like. Why is it beneficial to the end user, and why is it beneficial to the Circle team for integrating this way? So, those are like all the reasons why. Nice. Of our journey so far, right? And this is like one of the reasons why it gave us confidence. And obviously, we've been, almost like 9 to 10 months into the building process.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's great. So, give us an idea of some of the remaining steps. You're 9 months in. What are some of the remaining steps that you have left until we hopefully get to see a public version of this?
Yeah. So we're getting very close. Before, we just want to emphasize, before we get to a public mainnet version, one thing that we're spending a lot of time on is getting ready the testnet version. There's a few reasons why we need to have a fully functional testnet. And when I say fully functional, it actually means that testnet is going to mirror exactly how the mainnet looks like. The reason why that is very important to us, there's a few reasons. But because we are building on these new infrastructure pieces like CCTP, as well as Wormhole's cross-chain message relay, we need to ensure three things. Number one is performance. So what performance actually means is when messages are being sent across different chains, how quickly are they being sent? Which messages are being dropped? How, if let's say they were being dropped, how quickly are they being picked back up? Right. Because, from chain to chain, it differs. So we need to ensure, there's the performance latency in there. The second reason is reliability, right? So just ensuring that, the uptimes, whenever a transaction gets through, right? Those transactions do not get missed. Okay. And the third reason is actually usability. So usability here means that because we're building on these new infrastructure pieces, that is actually going to change, how, the borrow and lend workflow actually looks like. Because previously, because these markets exist on individual chains, liquidation happens only on the individual chains. Right. However, because Pike is cross-chain borrow lend, that means liquidation would happen in a multi-chain format. And we need to make sure that, when price fluctuates, liquidation across multiple chains also is able to work effectively in tandem. So I would say these are the three things three reasons why we need to ensure we have a fully functional testnet before we get to mainnet. And even before we get to, so after we check off these boxes, we actually have a few more things to do. One is the security audit, and then as well as economic assessment, of the different, collateral threshold. It sounds like there's a lot of pieces still missing. Yeah. However, all of these are actually being worked on concurrently. So once we are, once we have the testnet available, it's going to mimic exactly how the mainnet is going to look like. And once these boxes are checked, then we'll be ready.
No, this is great. And I think it's awesome too, because, our developer community are the ones that are going to be listening to this. And I think it's important for them to understand the amount of diligence, work ethic, and commitment to excellence that it takes to come out with something that is truly not just innovative, but trustworthy and a product that hopefully, and I'm rooting for Pike, can, reach beyond just the normal Web3 audience and into some mainstream adoption. So I really want to thank you, Terry, today for this time. I think that what you all are doing is extremely exciting. When CCTP was announced, this is a sort of innovations that we were hoping to see, and we're glad to start to see this come to life. To everyone watching, I must say that we have a couple great announcements. Moving forward, if you want to see a full walkthrough of this, you can actually go ahead and click the button here in the description. It'll take you right to that video where Terry and his team will do a full walkthrough of what he described in this interview. The second part to this and third part to this entire series with Pike is going to be a workshop. That's right. Terry and his team is going to invite you into our Build on Circle Discord to give you a step-by-step walkthrough explaining how they leverage CCTP and Wormhole's cross-chain relayer to create what they've done. I think it really says a lot about Pike that they're not just here to build their own product, but also help to revolutionize the entire space. So much thank you, gratitude to yourself, Terry. Extremely excited to see the growth. And as always, we're here for you whenever you need us. We want to make sure that we give you all the tools that you need to grow. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Sam. Just one very quick wrap up, from my side is, without the key infrastructure pieces, like CCTP, like Wormhole's cross-chain message relay, Pike would not be possible because, it's infrastructure that you guys, the infrastructure solutions that you guys are building allows us to be able to create these innovative, primitives on top, right? And in this specific case, I think, the vision that we're trying to, deliver here, very much aligns with what you guys are trying to do, is to enhance user experience, reduce the amount of liquidity fragmentation across different chains. So, big kudos to, you as well as the Circle team.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.